And now we move on to our next panel discussion, for which our first panelist is going to be Mr. Akhil, Handa, Head, FinTech and Partnerships, Mobile Banking, Bank of Baroda. Please bring your hands together for Mr. Akhil, Handa. Our next panelist this afternoon is going to be Mr. Pawan, Bakhshi, India Lead Financial Services for Poor, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Joining them would be Mr. Rajeev Ahuja, Executive Director, RBL Bank. And then we have Mr. Shripal Shah, Head Operations, Finance and Technology, Kotak Securities Limited. Is he here? All right. And the moderator for this one is going to be Mr. Singh, Jaini, founder, The Digital Fifth.
So, I think we met Shripal. Okay, maybe we'll wait for him to join, I guess. Yeah? Okay. So, we'll start. I know it's not easy to see empty chairs. I think till a few minutes back it was like overcrowded and slightly different, but I think the discussion is interesting and very, very close to my heart. And therefore, the questions I'm going to ask are also slightly sort of haunting me as well as we go forward. So I think the challenge which we see is in the banking and BFSI community, there's always a talk about technology leading a lot of change. All the ads you see in the market also around technology. All banks, all NBFCs talk about digitization and everything else. But when it comes to internal architecture, the technology teams are always support teams and sometimes not treated well, I can tell you, from my life. Sometimes you're not treated well. You're supposed to be taking care of PCs or laptop or maybe connections at times, which is the most critical thing for maybe CXOs. But so the question which I had was to the forum and the most sort of elitist of the crowd, the leadership here, is that from your perspective, Akhil, how do the CXOs get ready? Do you really think that CXOs or CDOs or CTOs are sort of getting ready to be in the board position? Do you think that's the direction should go, or you think that, I mean, they're supposed to be in support roles, yeah? Anything, bit loaded question, I guess.
No, I think there is great acceptance of the fact that, digital is becoming very, very mainstream. And every organization, banks included, BFSI spectrum as a whole, digital is the way forward. Now, the challenge is that the members of the board or the top management per se, till now they have, I think the ecosystem has done a good job in bringing them up to speed with the dictionary of digital. But necessarily the leadership on the technical or the digital verticals, they have not been able to get a seat on the high table yet.
Okay.
And I think, there are multiple factors that constrain it. Of course, in the, for example, in a public sector bank environment, the number of board of directors is controlled by and I'm being very specific, these are really borderline technicals. They're controlled by the Banking Regulation Act. And there has to be a shareholder nominee, there has to be an RBI nominee, there has to be a government nominee, there has to be 3 executive directors, etc., etc. And ultimately, there is only one director that can have some added expertise. And typically, what has happened is that director seems to have an expertise on the risk side. So and of course, risk is equally important, if not more important.
No doubt.
So I think being very technical, I think members of the board will have to be expanded to get that leadership in. But yes, there is a requirement to have them, and through the conversation, we will talk more about it.
No, I totally agree. But if you look at the movement which we have seen, I think only maybe ICICI you have seen a board member getting added from technology background. HDFC has done it. Ujjivan has done it, where Sachin Bansal is on board. And now, obviously, the CEO, Nitin, is also from a CDO background. I think some of them have taken the leap of faith, maybe on the top management side, but generally you don't see board, even if some of the boards will expand, by 10 more people, I think they will find five more lawyers to add to it, maybe because of the challenges, and maybe few more HR people are getting added, and maybe few more CAs. But I think tech guys are never not so prevalent. So, Pawan, from your perspective, I think you work so closely with the inclusion side as well. Maybe those companies are maybe dealing it very differently. Do you think the BFSI community also has to learn from that side, because technology and fintechs are largely driven by those who are on the other side and adding to inclusion side as well? So if banks had it, it would be better.
So I think what you're alluding to is that when you take the standard stuff on BFSI and say you add fintech to it, and will you therefore solve the inclusion issue? You're essentially speaking about strategy, right? And you're saying what is going to be the strategy for the organization from here on? And if the strategy is going to be sort of defined by saying, do we need tech to succeed in the future? I think that is a foregone kind of conclusion. But if you're saying that, what does it take for me to compete in the new space? Then you're going to add elements of technology.
Okay.
And when I talk of technology, there are two elements to that piece of technology. One is, how do we do things in a better way that we already do? And two, what do we need to do sort of new, which we don't do today?
Okay.
So there is a difference in technology and digital. Therefore, that you could use technology to do things in a better way that you're already sort of doing. But you might need digital to do this in a very different way.
Okay.
Right? And therefore, I think growth of organizations is going to be dependent on that strategy, on how do they see the role of technology and digital in their life. We firmly believe that to get access and usage to go on in India and elsewhere in the world, in where banks have traditionally not been able to reach, the answer is digital, right? And to be able to do that, rethink things in a very, very different way. In terms of both access, in terms of usage, in terms of how do you onboard customers, into what does this allow you to do in terms of cost of acquisition of customers, and what happens to the cost of compliance if you're digital versus if you aren't digital. All of that gets embedded in the business strategy itself.
Okay.
Therefore, in our mind, if you're going to talk of a fintech organization, obviously every fintech is going to have a digital or tech guy on its board already,
Okay.
right? And so it's a foregone, I think, conclusion that it's needed. I think it's happening. I think the question is, how do you accelerate it, right?
Correct.
And are we ready, or are the folks in digital and technology ready to assume a board level kind of position? What does it take to move away from doing things in a tactical way to doing stuff in a strategic way? I think that's where the difference is going to lie.
No, I completely accept that point. I think RBL obviously is ahead of times from a digital side. I think you're the first entity in the country who would have had a banking as a service itself getting launched, and the structure is all digital and partnership oriented. So, do you see that kind of trend? And if you, since you are already ahead, maybe you already see it, how do you sort of enable that structure as such? Because people can learn from your model and sort of create it for themselves.
Yeah, so I'll probably extend Pawan's point a little bit more emphatically. I think we over-index on technology. I mean, let me be absolutely blunt. Ultimately, business is about to serve a certain need. And in that need, over a period of time, create a competitive position and hopefully make money. Okay, and there are many aspects to it. So I don't think technology is more important than HR, is more important than risk, and is also not more important than how society accepts your rapid acceleration of businesses. And we've seen, digital-led businesses which are over-indexed, if I want to flog the word, that because it's digital, I can do it. The society is not yet to, so look at the, ride sharing or meal ordering. There are aspects to it which a technology-centric mind will not be able to nuance. I'm not saying they don't have it, but if you just drive on one track of technology. So, interestingly, we don't have a specialist technology guy on the board, okay, we have made it a point that all our board members should understand how technology can help achieve our ultimate objectives. And therefore, we don't even have an R&D unit or innovation unit in the bank.
Okay.
Technology has to be one more factor of production, which changes your economics or allows you to see things a little differently than what you would have seen later. Now, I'll give you two examples, one of which is a success and one which is not.
Okay.
Financial inclusion, we started the idiot way. People. In 2011, when we started, it took us 45 days to approve a loan. But if we hadn't gone through that, we wouldn't have reached where we could approve a loan in 48 hours because the environment around Aadhar and bureau data was not yet evolved. We used to use Nokia Asha phones to collect data, and that was data which was not connected. I mean, imagine trying to do it on 2G 8-9 years ago. But today, it's all integrated. Now, I don't know. I mean, if I had just said technology as my thing, I would have never been reached here. We do a fairly decent job in financial inclusion. We are in 1,200 branches across rural India and add about 4 million, work with 4 million households. Now, I mean, if I just planned it such that it would be technology, it probably wouldn't be sitting here. The other cases where we actually said, and 2.5, 3 years ago, there was a lot of talk about wallets and this. And, we were, in our boardrooms, people used to say, oh, you are a challenger bank. Please go and spend a lot of money. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have that kind of, we are measured on ROA. We are not measured on GTV or GMV. I mean, I'm not saying that's wrong.
I agree.
But actually, the challenge for us was that as a bank, you are perceived by the physicality and your people and the last mile service on KYC remediation, which is still broken, by the way.
I agree.
So how do you integrate a technology, trusted way of working with your 99% of your resources, both physical and people? And I think whoever understands this integration, okay, can then sit at the board and say, you know what? Technology is an important element. It allows me to do many things. And I think that's when I'd like technology to be not discussed, maybe 3 years from now as a business doer, because it is a business doer. I mean, it's like saying 25 years ago, we never used to have email for each of us. Today, if you don't have an email, you can't function. So I think somewhere we over-index, we overemphasize. In our bank, we actually make it a point that everybody who's part of business or ops or risk or HR actually understands what technology can help them achieve or help them avoid.
Okay. Thanks. I think a lot of learning maybe. But the other thing maybe from when we kept on alluring to the fact that digital is sort of becoming the strategy, right? I think that's a fact which you have to look at. I was looking at Bajaj Finance strategy. It's very difficult to segregate between a business strategy and digital strategy. It's exactly looking the same. In fact, they have one other statement saying that they are always in a state of beta. So they're evolving all the time and maybe working 6 days a week, which many of us don't, right? So maybe that's what they're doing, which is also creating a different ecosystem. So coming to you, Akhil, how do we do these CXOs, CDOs and CTOs sort of get ready? You said that they're not ready, right? How do they get ready? What do they need to do? Because if they're not included in business discussions, it's very difficult for them to solve it. Or maybe they are still in too much of BAU, server nahi baitha, this nahi chala, and all that typical stuff. How do they get ready for it?
I think it is a chicken and egg situation to that extent, but some organizations have solved it in different ways. One is the creation of a CDO. The CDO typically is not really a technology organization person. He's leading the digital organization. And if you just rewind back a couple of years, the way when the bolt-ons of technology were being brought on to branch banking, the way digital was getting assimilated in the various functions of the bank, retail bank or corporate bank, was by getting digital champions embedded there. And then as digital is becoming more and more front and center of where we are, it is been found that it is useful to have a single person who understands the business aspects and is able to marry it with the technological evolution as well, and is able to take a slightly more strategic view. That is where the CDO role really comes in. In some cases, I've also seen in BFSI particularly that the chief digital officer and the retail banking verticals are also, some organizations are also experimenting with merging them together, and being able to have a single point of leadership for both these, because ultimately, digital is first seen, felt, and experienced at the retail level.
I agree.
And, so that is another way of doing it. So I think there's no one silver bullet, but I think organizations are solving for it in some very creative ways. See, ultimately, I think as Rajeev and Pawan has also mentioned, it is business which is front and center of your organization. And as the requirements of business will turn digital, people will gather around it. A couple of months back, I read a very interesting note from a CEO of one of the Indian banks, laying down a correlation between digitization of a bank as measured by various parameters, digital transactions, channels, front faces, to the stock prices, the multiple that the stock gets.
I agree. I agree.
And he proved that there is a relation. So if you forget about everything else and just look at that particular study, it says the more digital you are, the better the valuation you get. And for all the institutions that you're mentioning, if you just do a top of the head check, I mean, an NBFC trading at 6 times of book,
I know.
right? It's only because of certain, because they are seen, or they are very digital. And if that be the case, then there is a direct reason for shareholders to be very, very mindful of bringing in digital skills into the leadership, or getting in a digital leader into the room as a member of the board, as member of, see, everybody, we have strategy committees of the board.
Correct.
We have digital committees. So there is an element of leadership there. But it has to be done at a very strategic level and in a very mindful, concerted way to really make a difference. Look, in our case, we operate across the country, right? 125 million customers.
Okay.
9,500 branches. There is a spaghetti of applications that we have, because that is how we've evolved.
Of course.
right?
Of course.
But we need some level of rationalization to sink in, and I think that will only come from the top, if not from the CEO, from a very empowered individual who has the say in the organization.
No, I agree. I think finally the CEO is supposed to be CTO as well, right? If he doesn't he thinks of the physical world and technology world or digital world is not known to him, sometimes he will sort of not solve it. In fact, just an example, we think of maybe Paytm in multiple ways. One of the things is that what percent of their business is sourced or processed online, and you will say almost 100%. But when it comes to banking from a sales perspective, the numbers are meager. It's typically under 10%, right? I'm talking about sales. So I think that is something which we thought that operations issues are solved by technology. And you said the processes, so entire digitization which is happening is about sort of saying that back office is removed and you say ops is cost, replace it with technology, right? And I think that's the old world of killing the operations and bringing technology in, but nobody's looking at from a sales perspective.
See, typically there are legacy challenges, and we can't just wish them away. In many cases, when we start challenging something, the first thing, the first pushback we get is, this is because of policy. And then you go back and tell them, okay, fine, policies are, change it. Then the next pushback...
That is maybe political policies, right?
Then the pushback you get is, it is regulation. And then you ask, okay, fine, show me the regulatory guideline which stipulates that. And either they'll get a 1970s regulation. There are regulations from 1970s that we're still following. And that is the reality of it. So there is a certain amount of legacy in the institutions which will be taken care of over a period of time. But no, just to your point, I think there is also a perceptual issue. I think large organizations are also moving in the right direction. In fact, just a few days back, we were looking at a metric very similar to what you're alluding to, which is the percentage of business sourced from digital channels. For our MSME business, we do almost 20% of business sourced and underwritten digitally.
Wow. Wow.
And it was surprising to me.
Okay.
And of course, it came as a surprise to everybody else as well. But there is, sometimes
No, I
we,
agree.
we don't really package it well.
Oh, totally agree. So, Pawan, the question I have is that while everybody is thinking of this change and the CDOs are changing and all that is happening, but how the environment is going to change, right? There's a political issue as well within the organization. Business largely leads the whole ecosystem, right? The sales guys typically drive and they control the whole process. So when things start changing, and it'll take time, I think it'll take 3 to 4 years before it happens. How does the environment work? Will the organization structure will change? How do you sustain this environment? Because suddenly the one segment is becoming slightly more elevated.
Well, good question. I think a couple of things. One is that I'm not too sure if we really need a role of a CDO. Okay.
Okay.
I think we should be seeing stuff which digital gets embedded in what people do, right? So if you talk to the sales guy, one of the metrics like he spoke about was that how many sales do you do online, right, or a digital channel? It's not independent. That's not a CDO's role. It's a customer acquisition strategy, and you could have a customer acquisition strategy which is online, offline, in the works. Right?
Correct.
And a similar way, how many customers are serviced online versus offline? So there will be an element of technology and digital embedded in the way people work. So it's not going to be different. So therefore, the skill set which you need ongoing from here onwards is creativity.
Okay.
That how good are you, as you said, do all people know how to use digital? And therefore, are you creative enough to understand what technology can get you to do? He highlighted a point saying that the legal head, a regulatory head will come back and tell you this is not allowed. Right? Now, why is that happening? Is because when the product is created, you're probably going to the legal or the regulatory head last. What happened if you change the process and said, hey, Mr. Legal Head or the regulatory head, you're a part of the team, come and tell me how should this be done. So you're no longer going to seek his permission, right? He's going to be a part of the team to go out and deliver it.
Okay.
Right? It changes the whole mindset, right? So you'll have to get everybody, including the legal guy and the regulatory guy and the finance guy and the salesperson, and the service person, everybody is rolled and their lives will be embedded with tech. That's the only way to succeed. If you're going to keep it from outside, that there's going to be an outside external intervention to be able to solve this, you're already on a wrong track.
Okay.
In my view. So, therefore, that environment will evolve as an organization evolves into doing something very, very different. But I will give you my own example. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a techie at all.
Okay.
But I'm still sitting here speaking about technology and digital, right? It's about how I understand that space. But if you talk to my children, they are far more evolved in technology in their lives than I ever was at that age, right? Even now, I can't at times think where I could use tech a lot more, but they do, right? As an example, I'll tell you, I come from Delhi, so there's a huge issue on pollution, right? And this is not on fintech, but I'm just giving an example. And so one of the
I think this is pollution tech. We generate and then we'll figure out what to do with it.
No, it's not around that. So it's about the thing by saying that not all cars and scooters and autos are always have a PUC, they should have. And my younger daughter, who's almost about 15 now, says, why can't they have phone numbers attached to the the RCs,
Correct.
so that you know which car has get one PUC every 3 months or every 6 months, and if they don't, send the challan back home. Now that's interesting idea. Extremely, I couldn't have imagined it, cheated, because it's embedded in her life.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
That's the way I think all roles in the future Starting now, I think it's already started off in RBL. I think it's a way of life that all roles embed tech and digital in their way of life, and that's what's going to help us succeed.
No, I totally agree, Pawan. I think there was a statement earlier that ops is tech's mistake. Okay, and that's how you visualize that whatever operations exist in any organization is a tech's mistake. Tech couldn't do it, so they put humans to it, and humans became powerful, so tech became behind. I'm slightly biased, right? And then the same thought process went into now sales, where I think tech is sold on its own. When I think any of these apps get sold, nobody is selling it, right? It sells on its own because of the virality of it, right? So the point is, the sales team is no longer required by the products of some of these products. I'm not talking all the places, but in some of the places. So that means that in certain cases, sales is also a text mistake, right? And then obviously compliance comes in when something is not getting tracked. We are always saying AI will solve the problem. So maybe I'm too biased, maybe. So I'll take a perspective from you, Rajeev, saying that how the organization will look like in future. What exactly will happen? Will we need offices in BKC? How, I mean, I'm just jumping from this. I'm saying how the organization will look like. Why do you need to be in BKC to sort of set up a bank? You can be anywhere, right? So, I mean, how do you think of the world going forward, or maybe the organizational structure going forward, given the structures?
So I'm a big believer, the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, so you will still need physical offices.
Absolutely.
Okay, like I said, we have bank branches in the rural market where customers need to have somebody come and tell them. Maybe 5 years from now, they'll access their bank statements because there'll be a transition in their own family. Youngsters will tell them how to graduate from WhatsApp to a bank app. But you'll still need people. I mean, we still need people because, so there are things which have now become seamless. And the entire pain has been transferred to the back end or drop on the floor.
Correct.
Or technology. But there's a lot of processes and customer responses and remediation which needs to happen in the market. And again, let's not forget, at the end of the day, just by clicking on an app, you can fulfill a few things. I mean, talk about food delivery. The manner in which the food is delivered, the state in which it is, and the way the person comes, this is not going to be solved just by tech alone.
I agree.
Okay, so there's culture, there's training, there's incentive, there's saying, please say, smile and say thank you and how are you doing today? That element has been there for thousands of years, will always remain. You'll just find a different way of doing it. Now, when you can put a chatbot on your app and do away with a lot of front-end work. But the chatbot, when everybody has the same chatbot from the same technology company, it'll become like your IVR line.
I agree.
So how do you humanize the chatbot is going to be the ask of the hour.
Agreed.
See, ultimately, people consume, not machines.
I agree.
Okay. So I think this is a false dichotomy. Organizations, and we are always going to be messy. We'll want things a certain way, and then we will get used to, we wanted them done better.
Okay.
And our job is to adapt, maybe preempt certain times, and the biggest thing is to fix internally. Because I work with a lot of fintechs. I can tell you their biggest challenge is HR and culture.
Correct.
The pace of hiring and having certain processes after some time, people just say, what the hell is happening here?
Correct. Thanks, Rajeev. I think there's a very different perspective. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe we have time for just one question, one or two questions. So if one of you want to ask it, please go ahead. I think yeah.
Hi, my name is Mustafa. I come from the UK, and we spoke about branches earlier, and Bank of Baroda having 9,500 branches, and in the role of technology. So my question around is, and I'll give the UK example. You probably have read in the press, branches are being shut down left, right, and center, and you have a lot of new challenger banks which are branchless banks per se, where you never visit a branch. Everything happens online, and it's mobile app based. When you compare that to the Indian diaspora and how things work in India, what is the view of the panelists over here from a 5-year plan? Do you see banks like that growing, or you go back to Mr. Ahuja's model where you need branches, you need people, and that is going to stay. So I would like to know the views
So
there.
maybe Akhil, I'll just tackle that and I'll tell you, we're a very young bank. So if you've seen us between 2010, 11, when we, started modernizing till 2014, they built it like the best private sector banks have done, go all over India. If you've seen our first presentation, we want to be India's neighborhood bank, okay? We were naive about it. 2014, this entire digital explosion, hype, wallets, challenger banks, neo banks. So we slowed down our bank branch expansion. And I'm talking about the urban metro markets, not the rural markets. And we figured actually when people have to deposit money, they need to see you physically around. They may not come to you. So today the transaction which happen in the branches is down from 80% to 30%. But people still need to have a perception. So interestingly, when we open a bank account on an app, which is, like a digital app with Aadhar, if there's somebody who calls the customer, they feel very reassured and the balances on average go up. If somebody visits them or they visit a physical place, balances go up again. And interestingly, the demonetization time made the presence of bank branches even more important.
Correct.
You couldn't get money in ATMs, you had to go to the bank branch. So the comfort factor, I think I saw the previous panel, small SIPs will probably go online. The moment you want to do 5, 10, 15,000 rupees, maybe today, maybe 3 years from now, you won't care about it. So I think there is a certain gradualism and then pretty much fast. So our branch sizes have come down, the number of people in the branches have come down, but by Jove, if I'm not in Chandigarh, nobody will know I exist. I can't do business just on an app in Chandigarh. Okay, meaningful business.
See, a 3 to 5 year view, I think, I'm with Rajeev on this. You need to physically see the branches. And, typically across the globe, the biggest of the buildings on high street are banks. And there's a reason for it. There's a reason for getting them. It is because those buildings act as poles of trust. Your branches are those poles of trust. And that trust, you may or may not transact physically in the branch, but you need to know that this is where I can get my money back should I need it. And that's very important. Having said that, I also believe that, of course, there's a very nice saying about India, which is whatever is true about India, the opposite is also true about India. So it's such a large continent, right? And, in some cases, I think in metros, of course, we see this dichotomy happening. Metros, of course, the number of transactions in the branches are gone down substantially. There are, we did a recent survey, and there were only 5 things that we really needed the individual, the customers to walk into the branch for. Things like, locker operations, which you cannot do anything about. Things like KYC updation, stuff like that. Other than that, everything can be done on your mobile applications, and that's it. However, the moment you start getting out of the metro and the Tier 1, Tier 2 cities, you see that the branches are extremely, extremely useful and relevant. In some of our branches, and not too far away from Mumbai, in fact, we get almost 200 to 300 footfalls every day. So, of course, the branches will be there. Will the branch network expand? I think you will see a little dip over the next 2 years, largely due to the fact that there is this huge integration exercise that is happening in India between public sector banks coming down from 21 to 12, which will see some level of rationalization. We ourselves are going to rationalize about 5% of our network. There's no point having 3 branches of 3 different banks, which are now one bank, on the same street. So that needs to be rationalized. So we'll do that.
So I'm sorry, I just had a point of view. And I'm
I was trying to close you because you had to leave, right? So I can continue. We can all continue because I think everybody wants to hear more.
Okay. Okay, so just a thought. I think it's something which I have, which is similar but also different. So if you see, it's a transition, right? And if you see large value transactions are already invisible. they don't happen at a bank branch already, right? Large corporates, somebody does a transaction at some place, it reflects RTGS, all that stuff happens, and they don't ever come to your own branch. They do need a little bit of servicing, which is great, but they don't need a branch. That has already gone and happened. Right? If you take under that now for SMEs versus individuals, so individuals like us today, maybe I can just take a guess here, at least for the other people I don't know about for my own self, I haven't gone to my bank branch in the last 1 decade. I don't even know where they've gone and shifted. I know I got an email from them about 1.5 years ago saying that because they're shifting, I don't even know where they were and where they were and shifted now. It makes no difference, right? So I would assume that's the same for most of us in the room as well who've not gone back to a branch in the last about 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But it's a transition. There are people who are, it's a question of trust. If you do know, I'll give you an example. If you take when, say, a telecom organization started doing the recharges electronic in 2004 to 2005, people would pay 10 rupees on the counter and wait till the recharge is done, and they got a message that is being recharged, and they went in and dialed *123# to check if the recharge is done. Today, you just go and see a customer today either does a recharge online because he's sure it'll get done, or even a poor customer goes to the retailer, places there 100 rupees or 50 rupees and walks away after leaving off the number because he knows it'll get done, right? That is a trust thing. So the moment people start to see trust in the ecosystem that this is happening already, I don't need to be there. Then there is a last consumer kind of segment at the bottom of the pyramid, and I don't know if it's branchless with the BC network or with some small branches, which might still remain for them to be able to build that trust, and I call that a bridge, right? It's a bridge from the analog to digital, and that bridge is needed, and I don't know how long it's needed for. Is it 5 years or 10 years or longer? But that is the bridge that they'll need to sort of cross to come from analog to digital. And the fact is, and the thing which is driving all of this is the cost of transaction. Because if your cost of transaction has to go down, and you are not going to be charging the customer very high levels of either his fees or charges. Why? Because tech is coming in and disrupting that entire game, then you're not going... The fact that first the charges, if you went into a branch and transacted to draw out cash, introduced by Citibank, was that you go to at the ATM, withdraw cash, was that it was far too expensive to service a customer at the counter than at the ATM, right? Now today is the norm, right? So it's a journey. And we've started on that journey. Banks are needed, right? Or the banking is needed, whether banks are needed or not, I don't know. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment because you're from the UK. There's this big drive for bank branches to become cafes. We're not meant to be cafes. Starbucks is a better cafe. You don't go to a bank branch to be a cafe. So, that's in jest, but a lot of suggestions come that you should convert your branches into cafe style thing. Nobody comes into a bank branch to be having the Starbucks kind of experience. So, if you don't want a bank branch, don't have a bank branch.
Agreed. I think you had one question and maybe some bit of patriotism came up. So we sort of started responding. So I think my perspective is that obviously we have to learn a lot from other countries, and other countries also have a lot to learn from us. And India is large, so therefore diversity will continue to be there. All right. So with this, I think close. I think many of you must be hungry, and obviously panel is hungry. So yeah, thank you for this, and yeah.
May I request Mr. Samir to give away the mementos to all our panelists?